Vsemogočni Bog. Nič nočem. Samo videla bi ga.
Jokala je. Veliko je prejokala. In ko je v njihovo hišo prišel sin trgovca Sulejmana, je nehala moliti. Po poroki je spet začela. Rekla si je, da je to pravična kazen. Bog je vedel, da ni bila iskrena v vsaki besedi, s katero je prisegla. Zato jo je kaznoval za to.
In naj se smejem, kadar se smeje, jokam, kadar se joka, in naj bom zadovoljna s tistim, kar osrečuje njega.
Sploh ni treba, da se obrne v mojo smer. Samo videla bi ga.
Festival literature sveta Fabula
v sodelovanju s Cankarjevim domom.
Dober večer in dobrodošli na festivalu Fabula, ki letos poteka na temo prihodnosti kot morda ali pa tudi ne privilegija. Letošnji festival, letošnja edicija festivala zaradi že znanih okoliščin ne poteka v živo, temveč pretežno na internetu, kar seveda vodi v nekakšno razočaranje, ampak zame kot moderatorko je to izjemna priložnost, da gledalcem prvič v svoji moderatorski zgodovini zaželim, da se udobno namestijo na svojih kavčih in se pred začetkom pogovora z našo nocojšnjo gostjo sprostite. Moja nocojšnja gostja je, kot verjetno veste, ker ste pač zato tukaj, omanska pisateljica Džoha Al-Harti, katere roman Nebesna telesa lahko v prevodu Barbare Skubic že kar nekaj časa prebirate v slovenščini in če se ne motim, je roman tik pred končno razprodajo in tudi ponatisom. Seveda je roman izšel v lični, novo oblikovani žepni zbirki Fabula. Džoha Al-Harti se slovenskemu občinstvu predstavlja prvič, se pa je prvič pred nekaj leti predstavila tudi angleškemu občinstvu. Ne samo to, je tudi prva pisateljica arabskega porekla, ki je za roman, o katerem se bova pogovarjali nocoj, prejela prestižno nagrado International Man Booker. To se je zgodilo, kot sem že dejala, leta 2019. Roman Nebesna telesa obravnava življenja več generacij ljudi v omanski vasici Al-Wafi. Posveti se življenju tistih bolj privilegiranih kot tisti diskriminiranih oziroma zatiranih, torej sužnjev oziroma nekdanjih sužnjev. Če bi morala na precej zapletenem zemljevidu tega romana poiskati osrednje protagoniste, bi to verjetno bile protagonistke, namreč 3 sestre, Maja, Asma in Havla, ki se morajo, seveda vsaka na svoj način, spopadati in soočati z vprašanji in zakonitostmi ljubezni, poroke oziroma dogovorjenih zakonov. Preden pa seveda izdam vse skrivnosti tega zapletenega romana, pa se je verjetno morda bolje obrniti na avtorico samo, da nam pač ona sama kaj zaupa o svojem delu. Če se ne motim, se nam avtorica nocoj javlja iz omanske prestolnice Muscat. Good evening, Miss Al-Harti.
Good evening, Anna.
I'm very pleased to host you here today, even though it feels to me a little bit like Eurovision, talking from studio to studio. But nevertheless, it's a great honor to have you here at the Fabula Festival.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank Fabula Festival for having me in this virtual meeting. And I would like to thank you too, Anna, for this conversation.
I would like to begin our conversation with the maybe for you slightly standard question, but we all know that your novel, The Celestial Bodies, has been awarded by the prestigious award, the International Man Booker, 2 years ago. And I was wondering, how was it to wake up to this extraordinary reality at the time?
It's still exciting, I think. The fact that it's still originally the only novel that originally written in Arabic that won the prize. This fact is interesting because it means that my novel opens this window to Arabic literature in so many cultures and languages.
And if I'm correct, your novel has since been translated into more than 20 languages, right? But I somewhere read that at first you had some trouble finding a publisher for it. How come? Why do you think that was?
Yeah, I think that publishing work is complicated. Many publishers in the West, maybe in the world, prefer to publish stories from places of conflict. They would prefer to publish stories from Syria or Iraq, places that appear in the news, instead of publishing story from quiet Oman. I think that sometimes they don't trust the reader, and actually the reader proves them wrong. The reader is smart and open to new cultures and new themes. So yeah, I mean, finally we found Sandstone Press in Scotland, and I believe they never regretted it.
I'm sure they haven't. I mean, the readers have proven all the other publishers very wrong, because your novel is still a trendsetter, a hit in the world. And, you know, when I read the fact that some novel has been published in 20 languages, I panic, and I'm not even, that's sort of a famous writer. Do you ever panic about this? I mean, how is it, how do you view these many lives of your novel in different languages that are completely hidden from you, basically? Are you very, do you try to control the reception, or are you very open to what might happen to them?
Yeah, I think I'm open. I think my characters found a new home, then found another home, then another. My characters being in different homes, they are safe, and knowing that make me smile. What is extraordinary about translation, that it brings us together in spite of all layers of separations and differences. It does bring us together, and I like that fact.
Yeah, I could agree, even though I panic sometimes. And as I have mentioned before, the novel Celestial Bodies takes place in Oman, in a little village called Alawathi, but you actually wrote it in Edinburgh, Scotland, quite far away from the place of conduct, so to say. And you studied Arabic literature in Edinburgh at the time, and I know now that about you, that you had a baby at the time and you were moving from small place to another small place very frequently with your husband. So to me, these don't seem like the best conditions to write such an enchanting novel, basically a literary hit. What drove you to write such a complex novel in such a seemingly complex time in your life?
Well, I'm not sure about the perfect conditions.
Mm-hmm.
A novel. From my experience at that time, I was a student, a PhD student in freezing Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
And I was struggling to write my PhD in English. So writing a novel about Oman, warm Oman, in Arabic, made this balance for me. During the day, I would work in my PhD in English, and during the night, I would work on my novel in Arabic. So it was kind of balance that I needed at that time. And also it was kind of comfort or shelter for me from these all new things in my life.
It still sounds very complex, actually. I'm wondering when you had time to sleep, by working so much.
Actually, I didn't work so much in the novel because it took 5 years. So I didn't like chapters after chapters every day. I took time to think as well. And some days I didn't work at all. I didn't write at all. So I took it like a comfort, not like something that I have to finish in 1 year or in 2 years or something like that.
This sounds something that's very rare to get today, I guess, in the literary world, to be able to take so much time to finish a work. And I guess this also reflects in the structure of the work, because it's quite complex. I mean, the structure is puzzle-like. The reader really starts to discover the stories very slowly. You jump from one space, from one time to another. You follow different temporal contexts. There are a lot of voices. It's slightly rhizomatic. It's like a little ginger root, basically. And I'm wondering how you came to this structure, basically, because it's so counterintuitive. It's really unlinear, but it somehow still works. Did you invest a lot of thinking into the construction of the story?
I think it reflects my way of thinking. I realized after finishing my 4th novel and published it 2 months ago, I just realized that this is my way of writing. I can't write in a linear way. And because maybe the way that I look at time, for example, the concept of time, and how it affects us in very complicated way. So yeah, I would enjoy reading novels that has this linear manner, but I don't think that I can write it.
That's very interesting. And since you mentioned time, the historical layer is also very prominent in the novel, because we readers follow very intricate developments in Oman's society and political life. On one hand, Oman is presented as this quite traditional society, and on the other, we get to know Oman as an urban, oil-rich state. And what was really fascinating to me, that despite describing some very, from our stance, problematic maybe, or very dark periods of Oman's history, you really approach this development with a lot of calm and without any moral judgment. And I'm wondering where this calm comes from. Are you just a calm person, or do you have a very specific view of history?
I like this question. Thank you. I believe every era in history has both its miseries and its wonders. Being able to look at both angles at the same time creates such an openness to a path of no judgment. It's also a path of human empathy amid all contradictions.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that by this you also avoid writing folkloric tales about your country, correct?
Sorry?
By being open to history, you also avoid writing folkloric tales. It's much more complex.
Yes.
The way you present the history.
Yes, I didn't mean to write like folkloric stories.
Mm-hmm. You yourself have also experienced some developments in your country. I mean, how did Oman change, and how do you think it will still change in the future? As a writer, I'm sure you have different visions for your country.
Yeah, I was born in 1978. So I lived my childhood during the 80s. And at that time, there were a lot of new things going on. A lot of new schools and new hospitals were open. And nowadays, it's still changing. If you left the country for 1 year and came back, you wouldn't recognize many areas. Like there is always new streets, new companies, new projects going on. So it is changing rapidly. For example, I went to Edinburgh, and I lived for 5 years, and then I came back and nothing changed. Every single shop was there. Every single cafe was there. But for Oman, this is impossible. It is changing very fast. What I am thinking of, how that affect people's thinking, how that affect people's values. When I was little, I remember hearing conversations about women's going to, should women go to universities? Should women go to study or work abroad? And there was such conversations. Nowadays in Oman, it goes without saying that girls should go to school and women travel abroad for study or work or so on. So it's not just materials, it's also values and thinking, which is changing rapidly, I think.
And one of your core interests and values also is Arabic literature, right? I mean, somewhere, I think in The Guardian, I read that you were, as a child, immersed in history and Arabic literature. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on that, how you came? Sorry.
Yes, I came from a literary family. My grandfather was a classical poet, and my uncle was a poet as well. My auntie is a children writer. So literature, classical literature was in the air. My mom would recite classical Arabic poetry while doing, house chores. And I just memorized a lot of classical poetry just listening to her when I was little. And then I grew up in this house, which has a huge library, but full with classical Arabic books. The concept of children books at that time wasn't very common in Oman. Of course, there were, children books, but it wasn't that common for children just to read children book. So to read more and more, I had no choice but to go to my family's library. And then I read these huge volumes of classical Arabic literature from 10th century and 11th century. And by time I understood everything and I familiarized myself with the style and the language. So yeah, I think it helped me later in my life.
In your writing career. So maybe let's return a little bit to the novel we're talking about tonight. The Celestial Bodies is, as I've mentioned probably 2 or 3 times before now, is a multi-generational, multi-layered story that organizes around the lives of 3 sisters, namely Maya, Asma, and Hawla. And these 3 women, to me at least, present 3 models of how women bear different expectations from the family and from society at large, especially when it comes to love and marriage. And of course, these 3 sisters, they bear these expectations very differently. Some are stronger, some are weaker, but maybe in total, you depict them as strong, as very poised, as very decisive. And could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on the strength of the female characters in your book? What does strength mean to you, the strength of a woman?
I think that inner strength has nothing to do with external circumstances. I don't see it as a manifestation of like something against slavery or against oppression or any other sort of oppressions. Like for someone like the character of Zarifa, she finds life and strength in dancing, in rituals, in her love for young Abdullah that she raised. This life comes from inner self. So maybe this is the way that I see it.
Mm-hmm. I understand. And one of the main male characters that you've just mentioned, Abdallah, is depicted as basically the most vulnerable in the whole novel. He is the character that actually externally suffers the most because of old unresolved wounds and also because of unrequited love from his wife Maya. And I was wondering whether you intended to intentionally play with our expectations about gender roles, because the women are so obviously strong and he's the weakest link.
Yeah, I think Abdullah is an interesting character. And for me, I think that patriarchal society affects everybody. It's not just women, not just women, also men. And for Abdullah, he suffers from this system because he suffered from the horrible authority of his father. And when he grew up, he suffered from unrequited love. And but the expectations of society expect him to be the man. And at the same time, it's totally different inside him. So it's for me, these relationships and these gender roles are very complicated. It's not like the stereotypes that people tend to think about it. In my life, I have seen so many strong women and troubled women, troubled men, strong men, weak men. So it's not like something just divided between men and women.
Humanity is very complex, isn't it?
Yes.
So I would say that from what you've explained, that in your view, anybody can claim authority despite their political or social context or position.
Yes, Zarifa, for example, she is a previous slave, and she is still like kind of a slave even when she was free by law. But she claims her strength. She claims her authority in every way she could do it.
And for this, she also receives a lot of love, especially from Abdallah, who is quite attached to her, right?
Yes, she was like his mother figure. She was like the mother figure in his life.
With an absent and slightly aggressive father also.
Yes.
Why have you decided to give Abdallah the voice of the first person? Because he's the only one that speaks in his own voice. The others do not. What was so special about Abdallah for you?
I think his characters requires it. When I think about his character, I can't imagine him without speaking with first person. So I think that's why he speaks in first person.
As I've mentioned before in the introduction, you have studied Arabic literature in Edinburgh, and now you teach it at the university in Muscat, right?
Yes.
What does teaching mean to you, or how does teaching differ from writing? What can you give to your students as a teacher or as a professor that you can't give to them as a writer, and vice versa?
I think I'm lucky because I'm teaching the subjects that I like. I'm teaching classical Arabic literature and the travel literature, which I like. So I basically enjoy the conversations between me and my students. But you can't avoid the concept of preaching in teaching. Somehow you are preaching. So in writing fiction, it's different. it's more free space for me. And also, sometimes you write about things that you can discuss. So that happened, for example, in my third novel, The Bitter Orange Tree.
Could you maybe speak a little bit more about Bitter Orange? I hope we can read it in Slovene soon. Because it's now to be published in English, or is it already out in English?
No, it's going to be published soon.
What can you explain a little bit?
Yes, this novel is about a young girl who traveled to study in Europe, and whilst being there and having relationships with people from different backgrounds, she recalled the memories of her grandmother. She wasn't her biological grandmother, but she considered her as her grandmother. And by focusing on that woman, I'm focusing on difficult era in Oman's history in 30s and 40s. So that grandmother had no education, no money, no status, but she stood for herself in spite all of these very difficult circumstances. So maybe in this novel, I'm trying to raise themes of sisterhood, brotherhood, womanhood, motherhood, complicated relationships, love, aging, death, and so on.
Since you mentioned sisterhood and womanhood, maybe I can pose my last question. How do you view the project of feminism in this very classical sense? What does this mean to you? Because you depict so many female stories, I can't avoid this notion now.
Yeah. My concept about feminism changed through years. But for now, what is interesting for me is to observe how it has different manifestations in different places and different cultures. And like I knew some women who had, like old women, who had no chance for education, and they had no status in society, but they are the most feminist women that I have ever seen. And at the same time, I have seen women who went to colleges, who studied abroad, who claimed their status in society, but they have no idea. Like maybe they know the theories, but they don't practice anything. So I see it away from the theories. I see it in practicing. I'm interested to see how women and men also practice feminism in different ways.
Because I guess you are a practitioner, right? Because you do speak openly, I mean, you write openly about female and male topics also, about hidden oppressions.
Yes.
I'm very glad we had this conversation, albeit via internet and albeit a little bit brief. Mrs. Al-Harti, thank you for these illuminating answers. I wish you all the best with your third novel, The Bitter Orange. I hope we can read it in Slovene as well, because it's, as you know, it's best to read in your mother tongue.
Of course. Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you for the audience for listening to us. And thank you again for these intellectual questions that made me think. And I hope to see my novel, my Bitter Orange novel, and also my new one in Slovenia.
We hope that too.
Thank you.
We hope that too. Vam, dragi gledalci oziroma poslušalci, pa prav tako želim prijetno nadaljevanje večera. In za konec seveda tudi kratek ekonomsko-propagandni vložek. Sejemske knjige so še vedno na voljo, med njimi seveda najdete tudi Nebesna telesa. Na voljo so v spletni knjigarni Beletrina, pa v fizični, pravi knjigarni Beletrina in tudi na drugih mestih. Nabor knjig je letos čudovit, lahko bi se reklo, da pravzaprav nebeški. Hvala za pozornost in lahko noč.
Džoha al-Harti, Nebesna telesa.
Maja, ki je ni zanimalo nič drugega kakor njena faraša, črni šivalni stroj znamke Butterfly, se je zaljubila.
Neslišna ljubezen, ki pa je njeno mršavo telo noč za nočjo stresala v valovih solza in vzdihov. Neprestano ji je bilo, kakor da bo umrla pod bremenom želje potem, da bi ga videla. Med jutranjo molitvijo se je priklanjala in se zaklinjala. Vsemogočni Bog, Gospod moj, nič nočem, samo videla bi ga. Vsemogočni Bog, Gospod, sploh ni treba, da se obrne v mojo smer, samo videla bi ga. Njena mati je bila prepričana, da tiha in bleda Maja na svetu misli samo na končke niti in blaga in sliši le drdranje šivalnega stroja.
A Maja, ki se cele dneve in dolgo v noč ni premaknila z lesenega stola z ravnim naslonom in še glave ni dvignila od faraše, če ni ravno potrebovala škari ali morala v plastični košarici, ki jo je hranila v leseni skrinjici, pobrskati z vretenom sukanca, je slišala vse glasove in videla vse barve tega sveta. Mati se je počutila hkrati hvaležno in krivo, da je Maja tako neješča in vročično upala, če tudi si tega upanja nikoli ne bi drznila ubesediti, da bo prišel nekdo, ki bo nad vse cenil Majine šivilske spretnosti in njen skromni tek in jo bo v poročnem sprevodu odpeljal na svoj dom. In je prišel.
Maja je sedela na lesenem stolu za strojem v kotu sprejemnice, ko je prišla njena zmagoslavna mati in ji nežno položila roko na ramo. Maja, hčerka moja, sin trgovca Sulejmana prosi za tvojo roko. Majino telo se je zakrčilo. Materina roka na njeni rami je bila nenadoma neznosno težka in grlo se ji je posušilo. Zdelo se ji je, da se ji nitke, kakor zanka z vislic, ovijajo okoli vratu. Mati se je nasmehnila. Po mojem si že malo prestara, da bi se delala tako plaho. S tem je bilo zadeve konec. Nihče več je ni omenil. Njena mati je poskrbela za poročna oblačila, za pravo mešanico dišav, za preoblačenje blazin za sedenje in za to, da se je novica razširila med sorodniki. Majini sestri sta molčali. Njen oče pa je stvari prepustil materi. Navsezadnje so njene hčere in poroka je ženska zadeva.
Maja je skrivaj nehala moliti. Namesto tega je šepetala.
Gospod, obljubila sem ti. Prisegla, da nočem ničesar, samo videti sem ga hotela. Prisegla sem, da ne bom naredila nič narobe in da ne bom razkrila tega, kar je v mojem srcu. Vse sem ti obljubila. Čemu si torej poslal sina trgovca Sulejmana v našo hišo? Me kaznuješ zaradi ljubezni? Saj mu nisem povedala, niti sestrama nisem povedala. Zakaj si nam poslal Sulejmanovega sina v hišo? Zakaj?
Kar zapustila nas boš, Maja? Je vprašala Havla. Maja je molčala. Si pripravljena, je rekla Asma in se zasmejala. Spomni se, kaj je beduinka rekla svoji hčeri nevesti. Besede, ki smo jih našle v Mustatrafu v omari.
Ni bil Mustatraf,
je rekla Maja. Asma se je ujezila. Kaj pa ti veš o knjigah? Prav tam je bilo. V rdeče usnje vezani knjigi zanimivosti iz vseh elegantnih umetnosti, ki stoji na drugi polici. Beduinka razlaga nevesti o vodi, črtalo za oči in o tem, da mora skrbeti za hrano in pijačo.
Da,
je resno rekla Maja.
In naj se smejem, kadar se smeje, jokam, kadar se joka in naj bom zadovoljna s tistim, kar osrečuje njega.
Kaj ti je, Maja? Se je vmešala Havla. Tega pač ne pravi. Pravi samo, da me bo veselila njegova sreča in žalostila njegova žalost.
Koga pa žalosti moja žalost?
Se je komaj slišno spraševala Maja. Beseda žalost je čudno zazvenela in sestre uvila v tesnobo.
Maja je ugledala Alija bin Halafa, ko se je ravno brez diplome vrnil z dolgoletnega študija v Londonu. Pogled nanj jo je osupnil. Bil je tako visok, da se je z glavo dotikal urnih oblakov in tako zelo vitek, da je Maja pomislila, kako ga mora zaščititi pred vetrom, ki je oblake nosil daleč proč. Princ je bil svetnik. Ni bil eden tistih navadnih ljudi, ki se potijo, spijo in preklinjajo. Prisegla sem ti, Gospod, da ga hočem samo še enkrat videti, nič drugega. In ga je videla. Ob prazniku obiranja datljev. Naslanjal se je na palmo in zaradi vročine je odvrgal čepico. Zagledala ga je in planila v jok. Stala je pri vodnem kolesu in se utapljala v solzah.
Osredotočila se je na njegovega duha. Zbrala je vse atome, ki jih je premogla in jih usmerila van. Zadržala je dih in celo srce ji je prenehalo biti, tako zelo je bila zbrana. Svojega duha je z vso silo usmerila v njegov duh. Poslala ga je in se popolnoma ločila od stvarnega sveta okoli sebe. Telo so ji stresali krči in skoraj bi je bilo konec, ko mu je pošiljala vso to silno energijo, potem pa čakala na njegovo znamenje, kakršnokoli znamenje, da je njegov duh prejel njeno sporočilo. Nobenega znaka ni bilo.
Prisegam ti, Gospod, samo še enkrat bi ga videla. Znoj na njegovem čelu, njegovo roko na deblu palme, njegova usta, ki obdelujejo datelj. Obljubljam ti, Gospod, nikomur ne bom povedala o tem morju, ki divja v meni. Prisegam ti, Gospod, nobene pozornosti nočem od njega. Kdo pa sploh sem? Dekle, ki ne zna drugega, kakor šivati. Ne spoznam se na knjige, kakor Asma, in nisem lepa, kakor Havla. Prisegam, Gospod, cel mesec bom potrpežljivo čakala, ampak po mesecu dni mi boš dal, da ga vidim. Ničesar ne bom opustila, obljubim, ne obveznih, ne dodatnih molitev in ne bom sanjala o ničemer, kar bi te lahko ujezilo. Prisegam ti, Gospod, da se nočem dotakniti ne njegove roke, ne njegovih las. Prisegam ti, Gospod, da mu nočem obrisati znoja s čela, tam pod palmo.
Jokala je, veliko je prejokala. In ko je v njihovo hišo prišel sin trgovca Sulejmana, je nehala moliti. Po poroki je spet začela. Rekla si je, da je to pravična kazen. Bog je vedel, da ni bila iskrena v vsaki besedi, s katero je prisegla. Zato jo je kaznoval za ta greh. Ko je čez nekaj mesecev zanosila, je lahko upala samo, da bo rodila z enako lahkoto, kakor njena mati. Spomnila se je materinih besed. Po dvorišču sem lovila kokoš, da bi jo zaklala, ker se je na kosilu nepričakovano pojavil moj stric.
Nenadoma mi je bilo, kakor da me je razneslo. Sesedla sem se na tla od bolečine. Tvoj oče je prišel z babico in ko me je zagledala, je rekla, njen čas je. Pomagala mi je v sobo in zaprla vrata. Pripravila me je do tega, da sem stala pokonci. In toliko dvignila roke, da sem se z vso močjo oprijela droga pritrjenega na steno. Ko so me izdale noge, je Bog ji odpusti zaupila.
Te ni sram? Hči šejka Masuda bo rodila leže, ker ne more stati?
Tako sem stala in se oklepala droga, dokler nisi zdrsnila iz mene, Maja. Naravnost v moje široke hlače. In zadušila bi se, če mi babica ne bi odlepila prstov z droga in te izvlekla. Pri Bogu ni me razgalila in nihče me ni videl. Zdaj pa vse hodite v bolnišnice v Maskat, kjer vam tiste indike in kristjanke pregledajo vsako špranjo. Prisežem, Maja, tebe in tvoje brate in sestre sem rodila stoje, kakor kobila. Bog se te usmili, babica. Ko sem se tako z obema rokama oklepala droga, se je drla name.
Ti, nesreča, če te samo slišim pisniti. Vse ženske rojevajo. Kakšen škandal bo, če zajavkaš? Škandal, šejkova hči. In nisem zinila niti besede, razen o Bog. Danes pa rojevajo leže in moški lahko čez celo bolnišnico slišijo njihove krike, nobenega sramu ni več, Bog mi je priča. Ko je bil njen trebuh tako okrogel, da ni več mogla spati, je Maja rekla sinu trgovca Sulejmana:
Poslušaj, ne bom rodila tukaj, prepuščena vsem tem babicam. Hočem, da me pelješ v Maskat.
1000-krat sem ti že povedal, imenuje se Muškat, jo je prekinil. Ona pa je nadaljevala, kakor da ga ne sliši.
Roditi hočem v bolnišnici Sada.
Da bo moj otrok padel v roke kristjanom, je rekel. Maja je molčala, a ko je vstopila v 9. mesec, jo je mož odpeljal v hišo svojega strica v 4. vadi Adaj v Muškatu in v misionarski bolnišnici Sada je rodila drobceno deklico.
Maja je odprla oči in zagledala hčerko v naročju svoje matere. Zaspala je in ko se je spet zbudila, se je deklica dojila pri njenih prsih. Ko je sin trgovca Sulejmana prišel pogledat novorojenko, mu je Maja povedala, da jo hoče imenovati London. Pomislil je, da je izčrpana od poroda in da nekaj blebeče. Naslednji dan pa se je s hčerko in materjo vrnila v stričevo hišo in sorodnike obvestila, da je novorojenki ime London. Stričeva žena ji je skuhala kurjo juho, spekla tanek kruh in jo silila s čajem iz triplata z medom. Pomagala ji je, da si je umila roke, nato pa se je usedla zraven njene postelje.
Maja, dragica.
Kaj?
Ženska jo je nežno potrepljala. Ali še vedno vztrajaš pri tem čudnem imenu za deklico? Kdo da hčeri ime London? To je ime kraja, draga, v deželi kristjanov. Vsi smo zelo presenečeni, ampak mislim, da glede na tvoje stanje lahko še enkrat premisliš o hčerkinem imenu. Imenujo Salima po svoji materi. Majina mama je bila zraven in se je razjezila: duša draga, po meni hočeš, da jo imenuje, jaz pa še živa. In zdaj, blagoslovljena z vnukinjo, bi rada, da umrem, da bo punčka lahko podedovala moje ime. Bog ne daj, se je vlekla nazaj stričeva žena. Veliko ljudi svoje otroke poimenuje po starših, ko so ti še zdravi in pri močeh. Naj se te zlo ne dotakne, Salima. Imenujo Marjam, ali Zajnab, ali Safija. Karkoli, samo ne London. Maja je hčerkico dvignila visoko v zrak.
Kaj pa manjka London? V mestu Dželan je ženska, ki je ime London.
Saj veš, da je ni zares ime London, je potrpežljivo vzdihnila teta. Samo vzdevek je, ki so ji ga dali ljudje, ker je tako svetle polti. Ta punčka pa, Maja se je deklico spustila v naročje.
Ni tako svetle polti, kakor trgovčeva družina, vendar je še vedno njihova hči. In ime ji je London.
Salima se je odločila, da je čas, da hčer in vnukinja odpelje v domači Al-Wafi, kjer bo Maja odležala 40 dni v hiši svoje matere in v njeni oskrbi. Poslušaj me, Abdullah, sin moj, je rekla zetu, tvoja žena je pravkar rodila prvega otroka, hčer. In hčere so blagoslov, materam pomagajo pri vzgoji bratov in sester. Za porodnico zdaj potrebujemo 40 živih kokoši, kozarec najčistejšega gorskega medu in kozarec prečiščenega masla podeželskih krav. Ko bo London dopolnila teden dni, ji bomo brila lase in njihovo težo darovala v srebru. Dovolj bo, da boš kupil ovco, katere meso bomo razdelili revežem. In vsako črko v imenu London je izgovorila počasi in razločno. Abdullahu se je obraz spremenil, vendar je prikimal in odpeljal svojo družinico in taščo domov v Al-Wafi.
Zdaj, mene je zelo veselil prevajati ta roman, ker se redko zgodi, da imamo priložnost tudi znotraj arabske književnosti, s katero se jaz ukvarjam, prevajati literaturo, ki prihaja iz zaliva. In seveda, jaz mislim, da nikoli pred tem romanom tudi nisem ničesar omanskega prebrala. Fascinantno se mi je pa zdelo, da je ona tudi za svoje primarno občinstvo, se pravi Omance, prebivalce zaliva in Arabce, razkrivala neka vprašanja, neke družbene okoliščine, o katerih se prej ni govorilo. Se pravi, ko boste prebrali roman ali pa če ste ga že, boste vedeli, da tukaj je ena cela linija zgodbe, ki govori o trgovini s sužnji in sužnjelastništvu, ne. In to je bilo nekaj, o čemer se prej ni govorilo. Glejte, roman je kratek, zelo lepo teče. Izjemno fajn ga je bilo prevajati, zato ker je avtorica ima podoben slog pisanja, kot imam jaz slog prevajanja. Če imate 5 besed, se vprašate, ali lahko poveste s 3, potem pa poskusite z 1. Zelo jedrnato, strnjeno je napisan in neverjetno veliko zgodbe pride noter. In glede na to, da je zgodb več, da se prepletajo, po mojem, da poleg tistih, ki jih zanima arabska literatura, malo bolj posebej, pač za vse je primerno. Jaz prevajam iz arabščine in iz angleščine in pravzaprav proces dela ni bistveno drugačen. Prevod je prevod, jezik je jezik. Jaz nimam nekako občutka, da iz enega jezika je lažje ali pa težje prevajati kot iz drugega. Seveda pri arabščini je neka dodatna komplikacija, ki sem jo malenkost načela že prej. Se pravi, mi nimamo študija arabščine na univerzi, kar pomeni, da vsi, ki prevajamo, smo ali priučeni, ali so to ljudje, ki so študirali v tujini, lahko so rojeni govorci, ki jih veseli. Skratka, če ste prevajalci iz arabščine, to je še kar osamljeno delo. Zdaj manj, zato ker vsa ta socialna omrežja so nekako vzpostavila eno komunikacijo vsaj po spletu, da se lahko ljudi sprašuje in tako, ker druga stvar, ki seveda jo tukaj treba omeniti, je, mi nimamo niti slovarja, ne, arabsko-slovenskega ali slovensko-arabskega.
Maja. Maja, ki je ni zanimalo nič drugega kakor njena faraša, črni šivalni stroj znamke Butterfly, se je zaljubila. Neslišna ljubezen, ki pa je njeno mršavo telo noč za nočjo stresala v valovih solza in vzdihov. Neprestano je bilo, kakor da bo umrla pod bremenom želje po tem, da bi ga videla.
Vsemogočni Bog. Gospod moj, nič nočem. Samo videla bi ga. Samo končni moj, gospod moj. Sploh ni treba, da se obrne v mojo smer. Samo videla bi ga. Samo videla bi ga.
Mati se je počutila hkrati hvaležno in krivo, da je Maja tako neješča.
Samo videla bi ga. Samo videla bi ga.
In vročično upala, četudi si tega upanja nikoli ne bi drznila ubesediti, da bo prišel nekdo, ki bo nadvse cenil Majine šiviljske spretnosti in njen skromni tek in jo bo v poročnem sprevodu odpeljal na svoj dom. In je prišel. Maja, hčerka moja, sin trgovca Sulejmana prosi za tvojo roko. Po mojem si že malo prestara, da bi se delala tako plaho.
Obljubila sem. Prisegla. Da nočem ničesar. Samo videti sem ga hotela. Prisegla sem. Prisegla sem. Da ne bom naredila nič narobe. Ne bom pokazala tega, kar je v mojem srcu. Obljubila sem. Vse sem ti obljubila. Čemu si torej poslal sina trgovca Sulejmana v našo hišo? Se mu nisem povedala. Niti sestrama nisem povedala. Zakaj si nam poslal Sulejmanovega sina v hišo?